Hello, it's Karen from the University City Public Library, and I am back again to tell a story. It may be a little late for St. Patrick's Day, but this is a story from Ireland, and it involves a little girl who lives on a farm in County Tipperary. Now, her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Murphy, had a farm there, and they worked their farm. And they had this single daughter by the name of Molly. And Molly was a grumpy child. She was just crabby all the time. Nothing made her happy. She had a bad temper, and even the kids at school didn't like her. And they teased her a lot because she was so crabby all the time. And of course, the more they teased her, the grumpier she got. So, after one particularly bad day at school where she'd been teased, she was walking home. And on the way home, there's this big field of mushrooms. So, she was stomping. She was so mad. She was stomping on all the mushrooms, just stomping them flat. And as she's going along stomping, she hears this voice. "Excuse me, miss, what did those mushrooms ever do to you to make you stomp them flat?" She turns around, and there's a leprechaun. And this leprechaun is coming closer. And finally he said, "Miss, why do you keep stomping on those poor mushrooms? They did nothing to you." Well, Molly, being the cranky thing that she is, grabbed the leprechaun by the collar and is holding him up, and he's hanging and he's kind of thrashing around trying to get loose. And she says, "This is no business of yours. What do you have to do with the mushrooms? And besides, you're a leprechaun. Leprechauns have pots of gold. I want your pot of gold. You need to tell me where it is. Right now." She shook him. And he said, "Oh, woe is me. I'm probably the one leprechaun in Ireland who doesn't have a pot of gold. There's no gold for me to give you." She says, "Well, we'll see about that." And she went stomping on home, crushing more and more mushrooms, just making them flat. And she finally gets back to her house, and the poor leprechaun has been shaken up, and he's just kind of woozy from it. And she takes him into the kitchen, and she sees a big pot of boiling water sitting on the stove. So she takes the leprechaun over to the pot of water, and she lowers him in so that just his feet are in the hot water. And he's going, "Oh, oh, oh, you're scorching my new shoes, ow!" And she lifted him back up and said, "Now are you going to tell me where the gold is? If not, I'm going to stick you in the pot again." Well, just then, Mrs. Murphy comes into the kitchen to see what all the fuss is about. She says, "Molly Murphy, you know better than to bring a leprechaun in the house. Leprechauns are bad luck when you bring them in the house. Turn that fella loose." And the leprechaun wiggled and squiggled, and finally he got loose, and he starts running out the door. But he turns and he looks at her, and before he leaves, he says, "Though you ask for pots of gold, that isn't what you're after. You'd be much better served with love and friends and laughter." And then he ran along his way. "Huh," said Molly. "Well, I still don't know where the gold is. So she stomped her way back out of the house, but the leprechaun is still standing in the yard. And he says, "You want to know where the gold is? Go back to where you found me." And he ran away. "Well," said Molly, "now I know where the gold is. I'm going to go dig it up." So she goes into the shed and she grabs her father's lucky shovel. Now, why was it a lucky shovel? Well, Molly didn't really know. It was just what her dad called it all the time. But while she was grabbing the shovel, there were 2 dragonflies, one red and one blue. And they were flying all around her head and just kept bothering her, and she was trying to shoo them away. And finally, she just took off down the path to get to where she had found the leprechaun. So she goes to where she saw him first and goes behind the bush that he came out from behind. And she finds a spot and she starts to dig. And she digs, and she digs, and she digs, and she digs. And eventually she had a hole that was deep enough that only the top of her head could be seen while she stood in it. But it was also growing dark. And as it got darker and darker, she realized she might not be able to find her way home. She may have to sleep in this hole for the entire night, out here, away from everybody. And she starts to cry. "Oh, I'm scared." But just then, the dragonflies came back. And they hovered around her, and they flew around her. And finally, they made for her to follow them. So she climbed out of the hole, and she followed the dragonflies, and they led her back home. And when she got there, she was just so tired. So she cleaned herself up, and she went to bed and slept. Well, the next day, the dragonflies were back. And they flew around her, and she was playing with them. And out in the yard, she chased them, and they chased her. And eventually, when she got to school, the kids tried teasing her, but she was too busy playing with the dragonflies. She was happy playing with the dragonflies. And then she came back home, and her father saw her, and he thought, well, this is amazing. Molly is happy. She's playing with these dragonflies. I've never seen anything like it. So this went on, and whenever Molly felt down or felt angry, she went and played with her dragonfly friends. And if she felt really angry and really bad, she would go get that lucky shovel and go to the edge of the yard and dig a hole. Not as big as the other hole, but she'd dig a hole. And then when she started feeling better, she'd fill the hole back up. So this became a habit with her. She'd play with the dragonflies, but if something happened to make her feel bad, she would get the shovel and go dig another hole. Soon, her father had been watching this and watching her dig holes and then just fill them back up. And he came up with an idea. He gave Molly some flower bulbs and said, if you're going to be digging holes, dig the hole, put the flower bulbs in, and cover them back up. Molly said, okay, I can do that. So whenever she got upset, she went out and she dug another hole and she put some more flower bulbs in and she covered them back up. And it wasn't long before spring arrived and plants started coming up where she had dug those holes. And soon her dragonfly buddies are flitting around among the yellow flowers. And what Mally had planted was yellow daffodils. So in the end, she had her pot of gold in the form of all the golden daffodils that she had planted. And that's the end of the story of Molly and the Scorched Leprechaun. The end. See you next time.